Okay, thank you, Tara, for that introduction. And as she said, Jon Skinner. And so we wanted to discuss diseases that are influencing corn yield. And we're going to focus primarily on two main diseases throughout this presentation. And then at the end, I'll give a little information on some management techniques and recommendations. I'm going to try and keep it to 30 minutes. I have a whole lot more information. So on my final slide, I will have my contact info posted if you want to reach out and ask any individual questions you have. But these diseases influencing corn yield that we're talking about today are going to be tar spot and southern rust. And the reason I chose those two is because they're relatively new to a lot of the folks in Illinois. We have seen tar spot throughout most of the state, and southern rust, it's definitely just dependent on the weather and the weather patterns on how far north in the state we see that disease. So these are two relatively new diseases. They take a little bit different management practice and management approach than those foliar diseases or stalk diseases that we're used to. And I've kind of termed these as driver diseases. They're going to be large players in how we manage in hybrid selection and the use of fungicide and timing of fungicide, more so than that of gray leaf spot or northern corn leaf blight. So because of the disease cycles that these have and how aggressive they are, they've been a little bit more of a nuisance to deal with. So we're going to dive into them, and I'll share some information that I've learned, some university studies, and some information we've had from our own internal practical farm research. So I'll go ahead and get started. The first one that we are going to talk about is going to be tar spot, Phyllochromatus. It's very identifiable. You can see it there in the picture as the black lesions on that corn leaf. So obviously its name is very indicative of the way it looks. It looks like spots of tar on the corn leaf. And a little bit more about it is it produces stromata, which are those black circular raised lesions. You're going to see those on the top side of the leaf and on the bottom side of the leaf. You can also see it on corn husk when the disease is extremely thick throughout the field. So almost all parts of the foliar portions of the corn plant are going to have this tar spot look to it. It also takes on another look. It may have a necrotic lesion around it, which is called a fisheye lesion. And we find that interesting in the United States with the Phyllochromatus strain of tar spot, that we see those fisheye lesions. If we look at early literature from Central America, Latin America on tar spot, they noted that when you saw the fisheye lesions, there was another strain called Monographellamatus with that Phyllochromatus, which caused the largest yield reductions in those regions. Now, in the United States, we can see the black lesions on their own like the picture, or we can see them with the fisheye lesions, either way. But through labs and through identification, it's only been observed that we have the Phyllochromatus strain. And we are seeing significant yield loss from just the one strain. This Phyllochromatus is the only Phyllochra species that's known to infect corn. So they have a very narrow host range, and there's other Phyllochra species that infect different cereal grains, different grass crops, things like that. But this one is very specific to corn being the host. So how do we get it? Well, where it came from can be debatable, but what we do know is that we do have it throughout most of Illinois, and it does follow a specific life cycle and has different characteristics on the environment in which it's going to cause the infection. So environmental conditions between 59 and 72 degrees is when it likes to infect. We have seen over the past year or so that temperature range may be expanded. A lot of times I'll get questions, well, it's 85, 90 degrees during the day, and we're still seeing this disease thrive and flourish. But we got to think about those nighttime temperatures when that temperature at night falls into the 60s, that's prime time for this disease to start an infection. Tar spot needs about 7 hours of leaf wetness, so that can be from rain, it can be from fog, dew, humidity, things like that. So a lot of times when we get into that pollination window and we see cooler night and we wake up and there's a heavy dew, most of the time that's provided the right environmental condition for tar spot to cause an infection. It does like a higher relative humidity. That kind of falls in line with the temperature and leaf wetness there, so that's no surprise. Tar spot will have a latent period of approximately 14 days. So that plant, the latent period is going to be when the plant is actually infected, but we don't see the lesions, the stromata yet. And this is a pretty aggressive disease. Its life cycle can be completed in as little as 12 days, and it's polycyclic, meaning that it will have multiple generations per year. So once we start seeing the infection, more than likely, if the environmental conditions are conducive to reinfections, we'll see that disease or that incidence level increase in those fields. Another thing we do know about it, it's an obligate biotroph, so it must have a living host. So once that plant reaches maturity, it senesces and dies. That's going to stop the reproductive cycle of tar spot. And then we know that it can overwinter on our residues. So that's something that we need to be cognizant of, because if you're on a corn-on-corn environment, burying that residue probably will have little benefit, just because of some things we'll talk about here in a minute of how tar spot moves and how it can be moved with storms. So you can see there the 59 to 72 degrees, 7 hours of leaf wetness, higher humidity. If we think about our summers in Illinois, that falls right in line. So all the way from the tip of Illinois below Interstate 70 all the way up to the state line in Wisconsin, we have seen these type of environmental conditions, and we do have the spores present. So we complete that disease triangle almost every year for this. So what I'm telling folks is that if you've had tar spot in your field, or your neighbors have had tar spot in their field, more than likely you're going to see it again if the environmental conditions are conducive for it. I want to share a couple pictures that gives you a little different look at tar spot. So from left to right on the screen, that left picture is probably one of the most severe tar spot infections that I have come across to date. That picture was actually taken September 12th, and you can see how brown that corn is. When I looked at this field in 2018, I first noticed tar spot in it in the middle part of August, and the corn was still green. It still looked seemingly healthy, and by September 12th, this corn had fully senesced. It was portions of the field were laying on the ground, and you can see it had about 85% foliar leaf coverage with those stromata on them. The middle picture is that fisheye lesion that I brought up earlier. So this picture gives you that fisheye look, how you can see the necrotic lesions around the black stromata there. I did send this off to the lab, and it was identified as only Phyllochromatus, so just one strain there. We did see significant yield loss in this field as well as the disease progressed. And the third picture on the right with my thumb in it there, you can see that tar spot actually infected on that leaf with another disease. So you see lesions of gray leaf spot on there as well. The larger lesions are gray leaf spot too. They've just coalesced and grown together. So it's an opportunistic disease that can grow right in conjunction with those other diseases. This map here I thought was interesting because it came out in 2017 or 2018, and it showed the corn-producing counties that are vulnerable to tar spot. So they took historic weather data, they looked at it, and they said, these areas that are colored on the map have environmental conditions that are conducive to tar spot growth and infection. The blue counties that you can see in there are the counties that had known tar spot at the time. And then the darker the color, the more prone you would be to have a tar spot infection. So this was kind of a forecast, a tar spot forecast that came out. And the unique thing about this is it was surprisingly accurate. So this was 2017. If I flip the map over to 2020 data, this is all the counties that had tar spot identified in it. So the gray ones had tar spot found in previous years. The darker colored orange there was positive in 2021 for tar spot. So very close similarities to the prediction map that was up before. Now, the unique thing about this is that it's covered a vast area. All of Illinois, besides some of those lower tier counties, my assumption would be that it is in those counties, that it just hasn't been confirmed yet. So definitely a disease we're going to continue to deal with in the state of Illinois. And it's something that I would encourage all corn growers to keep on the top of their mind, that that this can be a real disease that can affect yield. In the most severe cases, we've seen 60 to 100 bushel yield loss. We've seen standability issues. So it's a very real disease, and we need to consider it when we're talking about our crop plans and our management of how this could potentially affect us. So the causes of yield loss is kind of fourfold. We will see a reduction in photosynthesis. Obviously, some of those pictures I've shown previously and the picture on the screen now, you can see that it does take over that leaf surface. So obviously that corn plant's not going to be able to efficiently photosynthesize, making those sugars, making those starches to be remobilized to make grain. It's caused a rapid dry down. In the most severe cases, we've seen it cause full-blown senescence in as little as 10 days after infection. Now, that's not the norm by any means, so I don't want to scare everybody, but we have seen it in 2018 and then again in 2020, where it caused very severe infections and very, very rapid dry down. We do see some lodging when we start talking about heavy infections of tar spot. I would say that that's not 100% from the tar spot causing that stalk issue. But as we start to reduce photosynthesis, as we have more rapid dry down, and that plant begins to cannibalize itself and remobilize the starches and sugars from the leaf to jam it into that ear of corn, we start to see stalk integrity issues. When we see that start to happen, we start to see an increase of fusarium stalk diseases. We start to see an increase of gibberella stalk rot, things like that lead to the lodging concern. So maybe not the main concern when we talk about lodging and tar spot, that tar spot may not be causing it, but it's giving that plant, it's stressing that plant and giving an opportunity for those stalk diseases to really take hold and cause that lodging. The other thing with tar spot is it causes that plant not to be able to remobilize as efficiently. It colonizes the vascular bundles in the plant, and that's going to limit water flow and nutrient carbohydrate movement throughout the plant. So it does a lot of things. It's a very aggressive disease. So that's where we start to see those yield loss. And with what we know about hybrids now, modern hybrids, we're not adding kernels to the ear very much. We're getting our increased yield from kernel depth and kernel size. So if we can't have a full growing season, if tar spot cuts that down a little bit, we don't get that kernel depth, we don't get that grain weight, and we don't get that test weight, and that's where we start seeing those reductions in yield. I got a blank slide in here. Here's a progression slide. This was from September 5th, 2018, a picture. I just wanted to show you what it looked like on September 12th, 2018. So this was in Lee County, Illinois, up in the northern third of the state there, and it just took hold and it blew up. And we did have a moderate wind event. I'd say it was 30 to 40 mile per hour wind, and you can see the damage that was caused. Tar spot obviously took effect. There was some stalk rot as well as some crown rots in that field that led to the lodging. So very serious disease when we get a a severe infection. Here's a picture that I took with my drone. It's an aerial view. The pictures that are brown and senesced were covered in tar spot. The rest of the field did not have as much tar spot in there. It was still present, but it wasn't as severe as these small areas there. And you can see in the picture of the cornfield, there is a hybrid split in there. So we were doing some testing in this field, and the hybrid, as you can see, that goes down the rows, it is light and starting to senesce. That was a different hybrid there. So we do see hybrid susceptibility difference. On the ear picture, the ear on the left was a healthy corn plant. I just selected one, then I went into the area that was covered in tar spot, and I just picked a random ear, and you can see the difference there. You can obviously see there's going to be a yield difference in those two areas of the field. So now that we know a little bit about the life cycle, we know a little bit about how it infects, where do we go from here? How do we manage it? Will tillage work? Yeah, tillage will work in your field if you're one of the only guys in a township that has had tar spot. So if you're in the southern part of the state and it's a very new disease to you, and it may be a field here or a field there, tillage is going to be of benefit to bury that residue and bury those spores. Now, if you're in the central or northern part of Illinois, more than likely tillage isn't going to be something that's going to benefit you from getting a tar spot infection. We know that tar spot can spread its spores naturally without wind or rain events upwards of 250 feet. So when it shoots those spores out, they can travel upwards of 250 feet. You introduce a little wind or a little storm in there, and it can carry those spores a long, long way. So if your neighbors had it, if it's prevalent in your area and we get some of those wind or rainfall events, it can spread that way. So localized tillage is probably not going to be a huge benefit from it. Rotation will work for the year you rotate into. So if you rotate into any other crop besides corn, you're not at this time, you're not going to see the disease. But what's kind of unknown right now is how long these spores can survive on the residue and in the soil. Could it be a year? Could it be multiple years? We don't know that right now. So rotation will fix it for the next crop year, but long-term effects are unknown right now. One of the big ones I always like to touch on is hybrid placement and susceptibility. You could see from that picture on the previous slide that there was a vast difference in hybrid susceptibility, and I'll share a little more data on that on the next slide so you can see the differences. Fungicides, we'll get deeper into that in the following slide here too, but they have been known and we have seen the benefits of a fungicide application. What I always recommend is a mixed mode of action fungicide, one with 2 or 3 effective modes of action. They tend to have a little better residual, and they tend to be more effective against tar spot. And the last 3 points, scout, scout, scout. I can't stress it enough. With as aggressive as this disease is, if we're going to make a management recommendation, specifically with a fungicide, I want to be on the forefront of that infection. So I want to make an application when we start seeing those foliar lesions. So hopefully we can curb that disease as much as possible and don't see some of those 70, 80% leaf coverage areas of tar spot, and try and preserve some of that yield. So when we talk about hybrid susceptibility, this is from the University of Illinois. They had a hybrid trial in DeKalb, Illinois in 2018. And what they did is they went through and they ranked how severe the infection of tar spot was based on the different hybrids. So the numbers you see across the horizontal axis there are the identifiers of the hybrids. So the hybrids the names were not included in this at the request of the site owner, but just know each of those blue bars is a different hybrid. So in that one single trial, the University of Illinois noted that the most severe hybrids, the most severe infection was over 45% severity on the ear leaf. And at the same time in the same trial, there were hybrids that showed less than 10% infection rate on those hybrids. So hybrid difference makes a huge, huge impact on the severity of tar spot. So most seed companies will have those rankings. I talk to your seed suppliers and see if you can get those. Just know there is no genetic resistance currently in our hybrid lineups in the United States. So we're not going to have full-blown resistance. We're not going to have a bulletproof plan, but hybrid selection makes a huge difference in the severity of tar spot. The other thing that makes a difference is a fungicide application. On tar spot, from this trial here, this is a university trial, and what I want you to focus on is in the red box there. It's the percent tar spot on the ear leaf. EL is ear leaf on September 22nd. That's from an application that was made on August 7th. So you can see in the non-treated control, they had about a 15% coverage of tar spots there. As you look down the list at those different fungicides, you can see almost every fungicide had a significant statistical difference in the reduction of tar spot. So these are sprayed at VTR1, and they made a significant reduction in the severity of tar spot. So mixed mode of action fungicides are making a difference when they're sprayed at that early growth stage. We'll touch a little bit more on fungicide timing as I get closer to the end here, but I want to go into the other disease I talked about, and that's southern rust. So southern rust is a disease we've seen all the way up to the Wisconsin state line in Illinois, but it's very, very different than tar spot. It's a disease that will not overwinter on a residue. So this disease has to be windblown or ride in on storms every single year. Obviously, it comes up from the south, and so that's why in the state of Illinois, we typically see it worse in the southern locations, and then as we progress with different windblown storms, we'll see it in the north. So it's carried on wind currents, it lands on the leaves, infects, and then we start that life cycle. So it's very aggressive as well. It is a latent period of about 9 days, so that's quicker than what we see the tar spot have that latent period. And the unique thing about this is once it starts producing spores, it can produce, one pustule can produce spores for up to 8 days. So it's just, it gets the snowball rolling per se, and it just keeps building and building and building as long as those environmental conditions are in place. We'll speak more on the aggressiveness. It only needs about 6 hours of leaf wetness. And if you think about some of those late June, early July mornings, and we get those heavy dews, that's enough moisture to cause infection. And again, it favors relatively high humidity and temperatures that are warmer. So if we tend to stay warmer throughout the nighttime period, this is still a disease that can infect. You think of that disease triangle and the environmental conditions. We have the host in corn, we have the disease. With the southern rust, we just need that environment to produce this disease. So a disease, again, that can be controlled by fungicides, you really need to dive into your fungicide labels and see what controls southern rust because it's very specific, and not all fungicide labels are going to control southern rust. So it's another one that's new. No, it's not new, but it can be very aggressive and cause extremely high yield losses in those environments. So little different environmental factors needed, but funny story, in the central part of the state this year where southern rust was blowing up from the south and tar spot was coming down from the north, I saw corn plants that had both of them on there. So it was a very unique year in 2021 with disease, but these two are on the top of my radar. So we'll dive into a little bit about fungicide timing and a couple of unique looks at it. So when we do our practical farm research studies, we've found years and years and years of data that the highest ROI we get from a fungicide application has been at that VTR1. And that'll coincide with a lot of university data. It'll coincide with a lot of fungicide manufacturing data that has historically been the time that we want to apply a fungicide for foliar disease control and the highest ROI. So from our data, we, at our replicated sites across multi-locations, that's the same thing we found this year. In 2021, over all those sites, bam, hit it at R1. We had the highest ROI there. But when we started looking at sites like Central Illinois, that's at our El Paso location, we started seeing significant return on investment as we delayed that fungicide application. So a lot of times I get the question, when do we apply that fungicide? And I'll say, well, let's scout our fields, let's see what's out there. If we're just going to make a blanket application, which isn't my favorite thing to do because of some integrated pest management factors that go into it, VT has been the recommendation that's been made. But this year at Central Illinois, we were clean at VT R1. We were very, very clean. And you can see from our data, we still did get a $10 ROI. But the thing that happened there was tar spot came in late. So after R2, we had a tar spot infection. We also did see some southern rust later in the season. So we started seeing an R2 application, an R3 application, were giving us significant ROIs versus the earlier tassel application. And even all the way up to R4, we were still seeing a pretty significant return on investment by spraying a fungicide. So after seeing this data, after seeing what happened in commercial fields and your folks' fields out there, I've changed my management recommendation, especially for tar spot and southern rust, that if we're clean at an R1 time frame, we may delay that application a little bit, especially if we have our own application equipment, a high clearance sprayer, or work tight with the aerial applicators, and we can get it done when we want to. Delaying that application if we're clean at R1 has provided a benefit all the way up to R4. So previous years, I've kind of gotten to R2, R3, and if we're clean, I haven't made those fungicide applications. In the presence of tar spot and southern rust, that management recommendation is going to change for me moving forward. When we look at the time of day to apply it, anytime we can extend that fungicide droplet life cycle, meaning our temperature is lower and our humidity is higher, and that doesn't evaporate as quick, we're going to see a return on investment. So typically that's in the morning or later in the evening, but not in the heat of the day. In the heat of the day, the plants are a little more stressed. The fungicide can't actively get in that cuticle as efficiently, and our evaporation potential is higher. So we don't see as high as return on investment from fungicides getting sprayed in the heat of the day. And that's what this data shows. You could see when we sprayed at 8 a.m. versus 3 p.m., we had about a 4 bushel advantage by doing that. Now, that's not always logistically feasible, but there are some things you can do if you have your own equipment to increase your ROI on your fungicide, and that's spraying in the morning when the humidity is higher and the temperature is lower. Another thing with fungicide timing that's come to the market this year is a product called Xyway. It's a liquid fertilizer-ready fungicide that you apply in furrow. It's a product from FMC. We have tested this a little bit. We've seen it in field trials. The universities have tested it. But one big thing that it's brought is stalk rot and crown rot control early in the season, so we don't see that lodging effect. And it's also been fairly good on foliar leaf diseases. So Xyway stout and season-long control of gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf bite, southern leaf blight, as well as these stalk diseases, which may be another opportunity for management when we talk about some of these foliar diseases. If we can apply Xyway in furrow, can we delay that foliar fungicide pass till later in the season and not have to worry about the gray leaf spot, not have to worry about the northern corn leaf blight, as well as pick up some control on the stalk and root rot. So we don't typically think about fungicide being mobile in the plant. We don't think about it being able to move outside of where it lands, outside of a little bit of locally systemic movement. But Xyway acts a little different when it's applied in furrow. You can see from this chart here, it's all the way up in the upper right-hand corner, that active ingredient, flutriafol, high residual and high mobility. So it's kind of changed the way we've looked a little bit about fungicide management. If we can get movement in the plant like this, maybe earlier applications are going to pay and we can clean up some of those stalk and root diseases that we've been battling here with the higher rainfall amounts, larger rainfall events that we've been seeing. So that's what I have on fungicide timing. Obviously, tar spot and southern rust are big drivers, big diseases that we need to manage for and plan for. There are definite benefits to the foliar fungicide applications, and there's benefits in hybrid selection. What I will say is when you're selecting your hybrids, I wouldn't go just for things that are great against tar spot. Obviously, there's a whole myriad of things that go into hybrid selection. Does it fit your acre, your soil type? What's your nitrogen program? How's the late season standability? There's all kinds of different factors. So select a hybrid based on one specific factor is not something that I'm necessarily going to recommend, but just look at the whole total package of the hybrid. Look at the stay green, its other foliar disease factors, and make a selection based on that. So in the essence of everybody's time, we said we keep it to a half hour. We're right on a half hour now. So if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, and you'd like to reach out, my contact information is there on the slide right now. Feel free to reach out, ask any questions, email any way you can. And I thank you all for attending, and it's been my pleasure to be able to present this information to you all.